Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this session, Man Up, and how we are going to be discussing how deconstructing masculinities improve adolescent well-being. This session is being organized by Equimundo, the GEAS study from Johns Hopkins University in partnership with Afrigen from Rwanda, and of course, also supported by UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund. Welcome, everyone. And without further ado, I would like to invite my co-host to introduce themselves, and we're going to go directly to this session. May I start inviting in the order I see you in this session? Can we start with Cody, and you can pass on the rest of the colleagues?
Thanks, Jose. Hi, everyone. My name is Cody Raganesi. I use he, him pronouns, and I am at Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice. Really excited to be here today. I will pass to my colleague in Rwanda, Evode from Afrian.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Adolescent. I'm a medical doctor in the country director of Afrian Rwanda. Afrian, which is the African Youth and Adolescent Network on Population Development. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm happy to be part of this session. Thanks. I'll pass the ball to Christine.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited also to be here. My name is Kristen Mari. I use she, her pronouns, and I am at Johns Hopkins and one of the co-PIs of the Global Early Adolescent Study.
Hello.
Grady, there is a lot of background noise, but we are going to also use the chat to introduce Grady. Grady is attending from abroad. Thank you, Grady. And this is Jose Roberto Luna from UNFPA headquarters. I'm part of the Global Adolescents and Youth team, and we appreciate to have this opportunity to discuss with all of you the role of promoting positive masculinities and mainly the importance of promoting positive masculinities with boys and young men in early adolescence for really achieving gender transformative change. We are going to be today discussing the relevance of promoting equitable gender relations with boys within the framework of safety and supporting environments for adolescent well-being, as this is part of all this global conversation we are having through this forum. And we are going to be having a combination of presentations from interactive elements discussing about the man box to discussing what the evidence is saying about promoting gender transformative change with boys in early adolescence. And finally, we're going to also have the chance to discuss with youth advocates and activists about their perspectives, discussing what the evidence is saying and what the programs are doing. So let me, in that sense, go directly to Cody and Ebodi, who are going to take us on for the next item of this session.
Great. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see a QR code. Sorry, one more. One more slide. And actually, yep, keep going. Yep, there we go. So the QR code is a Mentimeter. Some of you might be familiar with this. We're basically going to crowdsource some ideas based on this question. What are some words associated with being a, quote, real man in your community? And so what I'd like for you to do is take a few seconds, log on to mentimeter.com, or just take access the QR code by opening your phone camera. And we're just going to see some of the responses that come in terms of, I'm sure we have a lot of people from around the world on this call, just to see what it means to be a real man. What is your community telling you about being a real man? So take 30 seconds, please just log on. and we want to hear your thoughts. I see the largest one in the middle there is strong, and I need to make this a bit bigger because I can't see all of the small words. Let me go. All right, so we have unemotional, provider, there's brave, dominating, real men don't cry, financially stable, again, not crying. So we do see a lot of similarities here across the world. You know, we had 42 responses on this screen, and a lot of them, I'm assuming, were the same as others who wrote in. So just to say, what we're sort of getting at by this exercise is the idea that societies across the world and cultures around the world sort of force men and boys into a particular way of being, right? And we're sort of using the man box as an analogy because you might feel trapped inside that box of what society thinks you should do, you should think, you should dress like, all of those characteristics of what it means to be a real man. And so at Equimundo, we've done some research about the man box and sort of what those implications and consequences might be. So these were the man box sort of pillars and characteristics that we found across Mexico, the US, and the UK. And we know they're very relevant across the world as well in other contexts. So self-sufficiency, I think we saw that in the word cloud. We have acting tough, physical appearance, rigid masculine gender norms. So that's, you know, men have a specific role in society and women have another role in society. We have hypersexuality, heterosexuality, and aggression and control. So as you can imagine, these have a lot of negative consequences as it pertains to what does this mean for men and boys across the world. If you are going to be self-sufficient, be a risk taker, act strong, even in the face of adversity, there's obviously going to be some implications of that. So if you go to the next slide, these are some of the research reports that we've put out as Equimundo. And so just to sort of say that our research and lit reviews have found that men and boys who are in the box are more likely to perpetrate violence and then engage in unhealthy behaviors. So really, there are these connections between masculine norms and the implications on behavior and attitudes. So it's just really something to think about as we start to engage men and boys in our programming and really make that shift out of the box to see what's new. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to watch a very short video on an initiative that is funded by UNFPA and sort of co-founded as well as Equimundo around the Global Boyhood Initiative. And so this is an initiative that is in 5 or 6 countries at this point, but we're ever expanding, really trying to work with boys in school settings, in out of school settings, to make sure that they can grow up free of that box and really be able to express themselves with all of their emotions and all of their all of their aspirations can be realized. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to watch this minute-long video about what is possible. It doesn't need to be this way, that men are sort of stuck in this box.
Boys will be caring, creative, compassionate, confident, collaborative, complex, sensitive, resilient, accountable, courageous, expressive, themselves. Boys will become supportive friends, equal partners, nurturing parents, strong allies for social justice, positive role models, conscious leaders, happier, healthier, better men. Boys can be all this and more. And we're on a mission to help give them and those around them all they need to be just that. so boys and beyond can properly fulfill their potential as human beings. Because better boyhoods with less stereotypes and more connection, well, they're better for everyone. But we can't do it alone. Join us. Global Boyhood Initiative. Better boyhoods for a better world.
All right, thank you so much for showing that video. So this is just an example of some of the programming that Equimundo does and our partners around the world around trying to shift those negative attitudes and norms about the rigidity of manhood into something a bit more open and inviting. So with that, I am going to pass on to Kristen to talk a little bit about other interventions that they've found successful.
Thank you so much, Cody. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit about what we know so far about those types of programs that aim to modify those gender norms that are affecting adolescents, and then recommendations for where we think the field needs to go. So next slide, please. So just over the last 10 years, there's been a huge proliferation of programs that have targeted especially early adolescents, and programs that especially target adolescents through gender as a way to improve the health and well-being of adolescents. And the reason why we see this is that, first of all, there's been a much greater recognition of this period of early adolescence, which is the age of 10 to 14, as a key window of opportunity for many of these programs, because it's a time where there's this increased rapid development that's occurring. And it's also a time where we have found that adolescents at this stage are already recognizing gender norms that they're facing and are already articulating what it means to be a boy and a girl. And it's this incredible period of intensification of these gender norms that is underway, which is why a lot of these programs have decided to focus in this age group. The other thing is, globally, there's this increased understanding that gender is a key social determinant of health. We've seen this over and over, that even in this age group now, where adolescents subscribe to some of these negative gender norms, it influences their health in older adolescents and beyond. So next slide, please. So looking at these interventions, then, we call these interventions, first of all, gender transformative interventions, because they seek to actually change and modify these norms and roles to create more equal relationships between boys and girls. And the evidence shows that they are successful, mostly around attitudes and some behaviors. But what has been plaguing the field is a number of implementation challenges. So I'm going to give you just a few examples of what we've seen in the Global Early Adolescent Study. So there are two gender transformative interventions that were associated with our study that had multiple waves of data, so we could look at change. The first was Growing Up Great, and that was a multi-level gender transformative intervention, primarily geared at improving sexual and reproductive health among both in-school and out-of-school youth in Kinshasa, the DRC. This was a one-year program. It focused on parents, teachers, but especially adolescents. And the primary entry point to gender norms was through focusing on the household share shoring between boys and girls in a household. Another intervention that we examined was called Cetera, and this was a comprehensive sexual education program that was also a gender transformative approach that was done in 3 different sites in Indonesia: Semarang, Denpasar, and Bandar Lampung, which are very different both culturally and religiously. This was a 2-year program focused primarily on in-school, and this was a broader focus on gender. So they used gender, they discussed gender in relation to adolescent relationships, dating, and positive sexuality. So next slide. But as I said before, implementation has really affected, or the challenges of implementation have really affected the success. And so just looking at some of these, in Cetera, for example, we saw much greater impacts in one site compared to the other, and that was in Semarang. But overall, we saw that facilitators had a difficulty in addressing some of the curriculum topics. They were often they often exhibited discomfort with gender, and especially with dating, and that consequently enabled some of the topics not to even be discussed. There was also inconsistent implementation in the two other sites, so Denpasar and Bandar Lampung, primarily related to COVID, but also because of the time that was slotted to teach this curriculum. In Kinshasa, we also saw implementation challenges, and that affected the results in terms of the in-school population particularly, because again, facilitators were often uncomfortable, but also the ministry did not want some of the topics such as contraception to even be discussed in the schools. And we also learned that facilitators also geared many of the topics specifically to adolescent girls, leaving many of the adolescent boys ignored. So next slide. So this then affected the results that we saw. So these are just a snapshot of the intervention effects from both Growing Up Great and Cetera on gender normative perceptions among adolescents. And as you can see, girls are benefiting more. You can see that if we did see effects, they were primarily among girls. The findings in red indicate that was a negative. It was actually the effects was going in the wrong direction. And so again, boys were not actually being affected in terms of their gender norm perceptions with these interventions. Next slide. We did see greater effects on sexual and reproductive health, attitudes, communication, and knowledge, but this again was primarily among the sites in the Cetera intervention. If you look at Growing Up Great, again, it was primarily among girls, and especially among those that were out of school as opposed to in school. So next slide. So as part of the Growing Up Great, to make a sense of how these gender transformative interventions affect adolescent health, we developed a theory of change. And I know this is very difficult to change, but I just wanted to give you an overall for what this theory of change looks like. Next slide. The most important aspect that I want to point out with this theory of change is what we're calling the conditions of success. And what we learned across the interventions that were part of our Growing Up Great, and this included interventions that I didn't speak about that were also in other sites, such as in Nairobi and in New Orleans, and also in Malawi. And what we learned is that there were a number of common implementation factors that influence success. So just to take a few examples, in the green column is the facilitation column, and you can see that it was really important for facilitators to be engaging and comfortable with the material. In the red column with the curriculum, it's important for boys and girls to be both engaged. And in the yellow column, which is what we call an enabling environment, an important factor was having community champions being part of the intervention. So again, these were key factors that, again, if an intervention had these, it was more likely to be successful. Okay, next slide. But moving beyond the global early adolescence study and just looking at gender transformative interventions in general, there are still challenges that we see with particularly relevance to boys. So first of all, the majority of interventions, as I said, engage boys only to improve the situation for girls. You see this in the curriculum. And so what that consequently does for boys is it feels that they have to give up, or they either have to give up their power or they have to acknowledge the problems of masculinity. And so it puts the burden on them. The other thing that we found is that boys and girls are impacted very differently from gender norms. And so they respond very differently, but yet most of the interventions have the same types of topics for both boys and girls, not reflecting these differences. There was one review that we looked at that showed that girls may be responding more to education-based types of programs, whereas boys respond more to community mobilization, peer education, and more of these interpersonal approaches. So next slide. So how do we deal with this? And there is actually a debate that's currently going on about what is the best way to engage boys. Some suggest avoiding this zero-sum game where boys do have to give up this power to advance girls' empowerment. And a lot of people in this camp have suggested working only with boys. And so there's interventions that are, for example, targeting sports and coaches as a way to kind of just focus on the boys. But then many argue that this is kind of avoiding the point, and that girls and boys need to be with each other and recognize the impact of gender norms side by side. And many in this camp are suggesting gender synchronization approaches. But the third is that there is still several organizations and donor organizations out there that says, well, wait, we need to focus on girls. They are the ones that are most disadvantaged. And so let's keep the focus on girls. So the evidence is still emerging from all of these. But if you go to the next slide, there are some best practices that are coming out of some of the evaluations. And the first is this gender synchronization approach, where we engage both boys and girls to recognize the impact that gender norms are having on each other. The other thing that we're finding is the use of peer mentors, community leaders, and positive role models, many of which are selected from adolescents themselves. So for boys, this may be a sports figure in the community. In many societies, too, we've heard that positive teachers for boys can be successful as a role model. We've also heard that and seen evidence that using multi-component approaches are very successful. So things that combine different things, community campaigns with mass media, with counseling, are showing an impact for both boys and girls. And then finally, having an adequate duration. So avoiding those interventions that are very short-lived are proving not to be very successful. So having interventions that last at least 4 to 6 months and longer for more success is emerging from the evidence. So next slide. So where do we go from here then? Well, first of all, we do need more research to unpack those characteristics of interventions that are showing success for both boys and girls. What is it about those interventions that are showing this? And to learn more about that. But we also need evidence to understand better how to implement multi-level interventions, especially if we're talking about changing or modifying gender norms. We can't just be focusing on adolescents. We also have to focus on teachers. We have to focus on parents. But how do we do that effectively? More research needs to be done to look at that. And the final point that I want to make is that adolescents in any site are not a homogeneous population. There are other factors that interact with gender that are also important. So poverty, disability status, race and ethnicity also needs to be factored into these gender transformative interventions to have a positive impact. And to not look at an adolescent population the same. And so identifying those subgroups in the design is going to be really important for having the most impact. So I think that is it. And now I'm going to turn it over to my youth colleagues.
Thank you, Christine. But before that, just a reminder for all of us, and thank you for those attending the session, that you can use the chat box in case you would like to say something, to suggest, to make questions, to share your experiences in terms of what you have been observing in the programs, or what's your perspective about the importance of engaging with boys and young men. What do you think about this idea of starting early, especially after looking and reviewing what Cody has said in terms of the man book, but also what Christine has presented to us based on the evidence? You are all invited. So thank you so much. And of course, all the evidence, all what we are proposing as programmatic elements are not enough if we are not engaging with the people who are working in the field. This is the time to listen to their perspectives. So let me invite first Grady, and let's try to see if the sound is working right now for listening from him. And if not, we will go directly to Evolve. Grady, over to you.
So, do you hear me?
We can hear you, Grady. That's great.
Okay, thank you. So, can you sum up again?
We would like to hear your perspective from your experience in the field in terms of this conversation. If you can share with us what's your take, what are your perspectives after listening to Cody and also Christine, but your personal experiences as a youth activist in this field, working on masculinities. We would like to hear from you.
Okay, I'm speaking French. Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello,
C'est
everyone.
Grady Mbadou.
This is Grady Mbadu.
C'est encore un privilège de parler avec vous
It's a
aujourd'hui.
privilege to be able to talk to you today.
Et je vais vous parler de mon
And I'd
expérience
like
en
to
fait,
talk about my experience
étant dans le projet Bien Grandir.
being in the project Growing Up Well.
Ok, déjà, je me rappelle que ça date
I
d'il y a au
remember
moins 5 ans
that it's been 5 years now,
et que c'était vraiment intéressant, surtout voir
and it was really
comment
interesting, especially to see
on nous parlait du fait que les
how
garçons et les filles
we talked to us about the
voient
fact that girls and boys
et comment est-ce que les filles et les garçons étaient
how
égaux
girls and
dans
boys were equal
plusieurs tâches ou responsabilités qu'on pouvait les désigner.
many tasks and responsibilities.
Et sur ce, il y avait des clubs, on était membre
And
de
there were some clubs, we were member of some clubs.
et je me rappelle que j'étais leader
And
de
I
club à
remember
l'époque.
I was a leader of one of those clubs at the time.
Sur ce, il y avait plusieurs activités
There
qu'on
were
faisait dans le
many
club,
activities that we conducted within the space of the club,
surtout des activités vraiment avec l'implication des
especially
filles et des garçons
activities involving girls and boys
dans des travaux ménagers.
in household tasks.
Et sur ce, je veux parler du point ou du sujet qui
So I'm
traite
going to talk specifically about this subject.
du sujet qui traite que dans plusieurs familles au Congo, à
Various
Kinshasa
families in
précisément,
Congo,
on n'aime pas en fait que les garçons puissent être
people
impliqués
don't like
dans tout ce qui concerne en
boys
fait les
to be involved in household tasks.
surtout, on veut toujours que le garçon soit
People always want boys to do other things related to what we
et on
believe
ne veut
is
pas en fait,
boy stuff.
que le garçon puisse avoir ces tâches à accomplir.
And so we don't see boys doing those household tasks.
Sur ce, le projet Bien Grandir nous avait
So
vraiment
the
inculqué,
Grow Well
nous avait vraiment aidé
project involved us very much
à comprendre en fait
and helped
le
us
rôle d'un
understand
garçon ou
the
le rôle
role
d'une fille
of a boy and the role of a girl. It's not different.
et que ces derniers vont tous ensemble d'une même ligne.
And that everyone, girls and boys, have to work together and do the same things.
Bien sûr, nous n'avons pas oublié le fait que les garçons ou
Of
encore les
course,
filles
we didn't
sont
understand the fact that
différents.
we didn't forget the fact that the boys are impacted by stereotypes.
Surtout que les garçons, on dit d'eux être plus courageux que les filles.
Especially that boys are expected to be braver than girls.
Mais cela n'exclut pas le fait qu'ils peuvent accomplir des choses
This
ensemble.
does not exclude them from the fact that they can accomplish other things as well.
Ok, je crois que je vais me limiter là.
I think that this is all I had to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grady. And this is great to hear how your voice echoes what, for example, Cody was saying about the man box and all the gender mandates. And then Christine presenting all the evidence about gender norms, how difficult it is to change, what are the areas that are maybe more malleable to change, but at the same time, the real challenges that we face when we are working directly in the communities. Thank you so much. And let me go right now to hear from Ebode, from your perspective. And we would like to also hear, and just to say, colleagues, that we are receiving some questions in the chat. Thank you so much for your questions. There are questions about how do we manage these conversations when sometimes we have opposition or for example, pushback at the community level. At the same time, how boys, for example, in certain contexts are kept apart from girls in certain conditions. As Christine said, what are the intersecting vulnerabilities or factors that are also interplaying in this situation? So, Evote, over to you, and thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for introducing me. And yeah, as I said, coming from the African Youth and Adolescent Network on Population Development, Rwanda, which is bringing together 18 youth-led organizations in Rwanda, working to advance sexual reproductive health, gender equality, and sustainable development within for adolescent and youth. So currently, part of the work that we do as AFRIAN is to create and scale up some of the youth-friendly approaches and programs to be able to achieve the transformation that we are looking for through all those different thematics. And specifically in gender equality, I would like to share part of our experience on working on the Generation Gender Program, which is a global partnership that started in 2021 across 7 countries that aims to create a gender just and violence-free society with and for adolescent and youth. So, ASEAN, working with Equimundo and other stakeholders, while implementing this Generation Gender program in Rwanda, has been applying some of the gender transformative approaches, such as promoting positive masculinities among young boys within school clubs and even those adult schools within the families. And the process, it is the process that we're still developing. We've been trying to see how we can adapt some of the good models that were developed by other stakeholders and partners across the globe, and adapt them to our context. So we did a survey among those young boys and even the young girls. So in 2 different categories, the little one from the primary schools, the secondary schools, and even some who are going into universities, because we're looking into the age of around 9 to 24. So we just divided them into categories: those who are still into primary schools, those who are into high schools, and those who have started their universities, or even those who are out of schools. So one of the good approaches that we have done with those into the high schools, or even the ones into the primary schools, is leveraging the opportunities that they have, the clubs into the gender clubs within their schools, and then create among themselves some of the gender champions. So those gender champions are learning from different models, including positive boyhoods, so that they can be able to educate their peers on some of the transformation which is needed within our society. For example, the context is not quite different from what Gradzi was sharing. In Rwanda, you'll see in our former background, we were raised understanding that we not men are not or boys are not supposed to be taking care of or undergoing the care work at home, like cleaning the house, washing the dishes, and so on, cooking. In most of the families, that was reserved to girls. So, and we're trying to change the narratives, understanding like helping young people to understand that this is something which is helping them to improve their esteem and so on, to help them becoming Leo men, different to the way they were told to be, them growing as a Leo man was. Like that, the way you described into the Mentimeter, that a man is a strong person and so on. So we trying to change the narrative using these different approaches and targeting the beneficiaries or our young people and our adolescent, our boys into their different categories and where we can find them. So differently to some who are a bit adult, we have tried to introduce like the youth forum for the majority of those who are found into the communities, where we do the same based on the age and based on the context where they are. So we see a good lesson learned that we have learned in the process is that the transformation is to accelerate the transformation, we need to ensure a human-centered design and approaching the current issues that we have holistically, leaving nothing behind. So, and since the time that we have started, we're seeing like some of the good transformation. Of course, understanding that this require time to make sure that we achieve the transformation that we're looking for, but we're seeing good results. So this is something that we develop at the conclusion of the models and be able to share with the larger network of some of the activists to see how they can customize them within their respective networks and contexts. So thank you very much. That's all I can share. Thanks.
Thank you, Evode. And I think it's clear how this conversation is getting so much richness from everyone, and what you were saying in terms of what are the human-centered elements that we need to consider. But also something very important that you mentioned is how you did all these segmentations in terms of the age groups, but also if they were in school, out of school, responding to the specific not only needs but identities that can really get the programs closer to them and relevant. And we have very few minutes to go. However, we are really grateful that participants of this forum are sharing with us some questions, reflections. I would like to go back to Cody and Christine, and we have received different questions from the elements about how to deal with the pushback of the resistance, for example, to change, but at the same time, a question that can we work with adolescents individually that rather than focusing on the differences between boys and girls to debunk stereotypes. And I think also interrelated question is how we can really get boys interested in changing gender norms, especially among older generations. And I think that resonates with what you were saying, Christine, in terms of what are the approaches that could be, like the most appropriate. But at the same time, Cody, how are we really going to be able to really break that box and give more freedoms to boys and young men, especially when we think that we really need to invest early and not to wait to have all our personality consolidated and then making the change more complex. Over to you. Can we start with Christine, and then Christine, you pass it on to Cody. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. So let's start. I think these are great questions and no easy answers, but some of the things that we have heard from other folks in the field, especially about how to deal with opposition, because that is very difficult to do. And what we've heard is that, like I said, going back to that theory of change with the conditions for success, having those community champions are really important. Because they can, and they have to be relevant not only to adolescents, but also respected and trustworthy in the community. And some folks have told me that it's also really important not to do everything at once, but to work incrementally, especially where you're in societies where there are very embedded stereotypes into the society. And so working incrementally and capturing those kind of changes along the way has been shown to be more successful in building that trust in those relationships. The other thing is that that I want to talk about is how do we get boys to be excited about this type of work. And there was also a question about working with adolescents individually and getting them to see kind of similarities. I think one of the steps is to get both boys and girls to understand that negative gender norms affect them both. But I think the gender norms may be different between boys and girls, but it's important for each of them to discuss that, to understand how each is affected. And it doesn't have to be like boys versus girls, but there's also, as we talked about, these intersectional approach. So different gender interacts with poverty, gender interacts with disability status, gender interacts with different racial ethnic groups. They're all going to be affected differently. And I think what's important is to create a safe space for everyone to talk about how they're impacted so that people understand these differences as well as similarities. Cody, I'm going to hand it off to you so that you can also speak on some of these.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just take a few minutes, particularly in the interest in gender. I think that's a really interesting point. I often experience when working with partners, it's like, okay, this program is great, but how do we get men and boys in the room and start talking about this? And it is a really great question. And I think to Kristen's point around different interventions, around sport or around play, those are different ways that you can sort of leverage what they're already interested in and have those conversations and dialogue in a way that doesn't feel dry or doesn't feel imposed. I think the other thing is we generally don't come out and say, hey, do you want to join a program about gender norms and change how it is to be a man, right? That's not the pitch. So the pitch really has to do with everything that we would cover around healthy relationships, around communication, around success for the future, around job preparedness, that sort of thing. So it's really around those life skills that we cover in sessions and in programs, but with the lens of gender norms, right? So as we're talking about communication, we're talking about how it's really important to express your emotions, some of those emotions being negative, but also really positive, right? So really integrating the idea of gender norms and what it is to be a man and how equality also benefits everyone within the program and it not being the only thing we talk about. I do also want to just touch on, there was a question about institutionalization with state actors, and I think maybe I'll roll this into the community opposition one as well. So I think when talking about scale up and sort of getting buy-in from school systems or ministries of education, I think, again, it's really important to sort of show the benefit of, right? And thanks to Kristen and her team and others, we're starting to see that evidence build up. And I think it's just really important to make the business case and the ethical case to state actors, to communities, that these types of interventions will not only improve individual lives, but it will also foster greater community and greater household dynamics, and all of those types of things. So coming up with a curriculum for an education system that is, that is sort of scalable is really difficult, but I think we're getting to that point where people are starting to see those benefits of gender transformative approaches. So let me stop there. I know Jose has some closing remarks we need to get to, but really appreciate all the questions and comments in the chat.
Thank you, Colby. And I know that we always struggle with all the questions and we don't have enough time for going through all of them. However, we really, really thank you. I would like to start by saying thanks to the partners that we put together this session with a lot of love, I have to say, to you, because we believe in equality and we believe that working in gender transformative programming can really change the life of people. It's not about an institutional perspective what we're presenting here. That's why it's so important. Thank Christine, thanks Cody, thanks Evodi, thanks Reggie. Thank you, Kara, who is also supporting us with the chat behind the scenes. But beyond that, and before just closing, we have 3 minutes to go. Just let me say on behalf of the group, let's say me take that liberty and beyond my agency saying that we really need to keep in the loop in this conversation about the Global Forum for Adolescents and beyond, in the whole conversation about adolescent well-being. We really need to make sure that early investments in adolescents, especially for transforming masculinities, is in the conversation and not necessarily just as an afterthought. When we say, oh, we are having issues with programs working with girls, so now we have to start thinking about how are we going to engage with boys. And our call here and this call to action is how we can really invest early when we are shaping the notions about socialization, when we are internalizing early, or even being able to change that from scratch, not waiting to these norms. And there was a question why these norms are so important, because our informal rules that are practically shaping what we can live or not in our communities, in our private lives, in our institutions. So how we can really tackle that. And you mentioned that, Christine, that it's not only about saying we are going to work right now with boys and what about girls. It's actually about working with both and even beyond, because we know that there are also young people that are not going to fit into just the boys and girls dichotomy. There is a lot of diversity. And there was also a question in terms of how we can make sure that the programs promoting positive masculinities are not repeating the gender stereotyping about these boundaries or this binary. I think that's also a call for reflection to all of us in terms of how we can make these programs really transformative. And that means that these programs should be able to not only redistribute resources, these resources could be capabilities, negotiation skills, how to manage all this pressure that could be coming from different places in our lives, but at the same time, power. And transforming power means that we are going to be able to not only discover our inner power, but then making it also a social power for transformation. Thank you so much, colleagues. Our call is how we can invest early, how we can keep the conversation about transforming masculinities. It's important if we really want to create a more gender equal world, and how this is not disconnected at all to adolescent well-being, because we know that dangerous or harmful masculinities are going to be hitting hardly and strongly the lives of boys in all their diversity, and also for girls around them. Thank you so much on behalf of our different agencies and institutions, and keep going this conversation around adolescent well-being around the world. Thank you so much.